So we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to Talent Analytics. My name is Stacy Broadwell. I will be your host. And today we are joined by Todd Davis. He's the global leader for talent acquisition at IBM. And he's also a member of my board of advisors. And he's the keynote at my second ever conference, TechRecruit in Orange County. So excited to have you join us. Once again, how are you doing, Todd?
I'm doing well, Stacy. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me back. It's always good to be invited back. I guess that's things went at least reasonably not okay or okay at the first time if you get invited back. So happy to be back.
Yeah, you actually were the guest on my very first Talent Analytics show. And if anybody wants to see the recap of that, you can go to our YouTube channel, just type in TechRecruit, one word, and you can find the recordings of all of our shows there. But today we're talking about something different, and you wrote an article on this and it received a lot of attention. What are we talking about today?
Well, what the article that I wrote was about using, really for recruiting and measuring recruiting, think about it as a supply chain problem and think about and learn about supply chain and the ideas behind supply chain thinking. All too often people in the business world and even recruiters, we think about recruiting as an HR problem or a challenge in human resources that can't really be measured well, and there's not ways to do it. And our customers, our clients, the people we recruit for, and our candidates are always, I think, pushing us in that opposite way, pushing us into the reality that it is a supply chain and helping us. So if we start thinking about it, recruiting, taking it for what it is in a holistic supply chain, we can really start to see not only better ways to measure it, but we can move to that next level of better ways to be successful in it, and really just get better as recruiters and be better as a function. And really, as in the point of the whole TechRecruit idea is, getting recruiters a seat at the table. It's coming in and thinking about it from a business point of view, from a deliverable, and from a supply chain.
Okay. I love this topic because we can dive into so many areas of your experience where you've actually implemented supply chain or redesigned the process. And tell us, so our viewers know, I know your background. Tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to your position here at IBM.
Sure. So, I've been recruiting for over 20 years now. I started in international business. Didn't start my career as a recruiter. I worked as a trade negotiator. And then moved into the private sector and high technology and worked globally. I managed international sales organizations for technology firms. And then after that, we lived and worked overseas for a little bit. And then when I came back, that's when I came back to the US and I really jumped into recruiting. People had followed me as far as hiring and building teams, and it was something I was really passionate about. So I started working in agencies and started leading teams in agency services, and then moved into a corporate function, leading larger and more global functions through time. So I worked at, when I worked overseas, I was working as a consultant. Then when I came here, again, in some of the boutique agency firms, worked for several years at Volt Information Sciences, which at the time was a multi-billion-dollar firm. And then moved from there into Centene, corporate insurance and global healthcare, and then to Warner Brothers, where I led global talent acquisition for several years. And then from there to Amazon. And Amazon is really where the whole concept today really came to fruition. These supply chain ideas were things that I had been thinking about and applying, but they didn't have a label. I didn't think about them this way. It was, there were different words. But when I went to Amazon and I saw supply chain thinking and all about logistics and how things get done in a process and mechanisms and all the really great ideas, I realized that, all these concepts that I've been applying and using, they have labels, and there are whole schools of thought. You can major in logistics and supply chain and things like that in college. And that's really where it came to, how I built up these roles. And then when I moved to the Bay Area, working at Ancestry, and then finally at IBM, it's really just around how to build these processes and make them not only a part of what we do, but the foundation of how we do things, both from performance, measures, and analytics to really drive that process forward.
Such an evolution. Just in your career alone. And okay, so I have a degree in finance, in corporate finance. And I remember I had a friend in college. I went to San Diego State University, and they were a logistics major. And I remember thinking, that sounds boring. Well, have fun in the warehouse, but it's really, when you think of logistics and supply chain, you think of this assembly line. And so maybe for those of us who aren't educated in that process, let's explain to our viewers really what is the idea behind supply chain and logistics. I don't know if you have the history of like the 4 to 7, I don't know,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
there's
no,
that sort of thing, but
I think an easy way to put it is think about it this way. When we buy something, we buy a product, whatever it is, a candy bar, a car, whatever it is, we purchase it. It doesn't just miraculously appear. We didn't just arrive at the store and because we wanted it there. There's an entire series of steps and processes, and each of these steps and processes has steps and processes inside it that allows it to get there. Think about, we'll use the candy bar analogy because it's simple and I like candy bars. There's a wrapper. Who put the wrapper together? At the factory where they were making the candy bars, how did the wrapper get to the machine for the candy bar to be wrapped in it at the right time, at the right place? How did they get into the box, the carton, et cetera? You can think about all these different questions you can just keep asking. And that's all about supply chain and supply chain analytics, understanding that, hey, look, for that candy bar to get into Todd's hand when he wants it at the store, there's an incredible amount of steps and processes. Now that's something that's easy to understand. Anybody can think about it, really a candy bar and just say, okay, there you go. But what about something like when we talk about like an automobile? When we get into all these parts and movements and, the supply chain of moving the cars themselves from A to B to get them to the dealer or to the online website inventory when you buy one. And then follow that before, you just keep going backwards. Assembling the car, the parts, the tires, the fuel, the oils, all those things. There's an incredible level of complexity there. And that's all what supply chain is about, having these optimized, best in practice supplies that follow a chain, hence the term supply chain, so that you can really begin to solve that problem and do that. I mean, you think about it here's another way to think about it that maybe all of us can deal with. Right now, many people are working from home, still working remotely. They're going to get coffee in the morning. They've come downstairs, they've made their coffee. Maybe they had it set up on a programmer time. That's a supply chain in action. They put the coffee in the machine, put the water in, set it up on the timer. They did all those things in advance so that when they came down this morning, hit that button or the timer went off, that coffee was made. That's a supply chain in action. Now, when they go to the fridge and they want to put some milk or some cream or whatever into their coffee and there isn't any, that's a supply chain failure. They didn't get their supply chain in advance. They didn't time it right. They're out. When you run out of something, that's a supply chain failure in action. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what supply chains are. And in the article, I talked about supply chains from a personal point of view, from recruiting. And I used the metaphor of a fulfillment center. When I was at Amazon, one of the great things they do when you join the company, especially in the operations group, which is where I worked, is you spend your first several days, no matter what your job is, doesn't matter. You could be in finance, accounting, recruiting, engineering, doesn't matter. You work in a fulfillment center. You spend your several days, you go there, you put on that vest, you work, you get stuff off the shelves, you make the boxes, you go through this whole process. And it's incredibly valuable. And I used in the article and this is really where this idea came together for me in the first place, was that a fulfillment center is hundreds of thousands, millions of square feet or cubic feet of space with inventory, all the things you buy on that website, and when they deliver them to you. And there are these folks that they call pickers that have these carts and they go through the warehouse, they get instructions through the technology, and they were told where to go to find the item that someone has purchased and is hoping to get very, very quickly and in good condition. And they pick it off the shelf and then they put it in their bin, push it, get it to the packers who put it in the boxes, who send it down conveyors, and then all those things get labeled. And you can imagine that very complex supply chain process even within the fulfillment center. But now as a recruiter, imagine if those creatures, those items, those things on the shelves are alive. They're people. So the picker says, hey, the customer has said, we want this type of person, we need this skill set. Go there, go to that shelf on that aisle, go find them, get them in your cart and bring them in. Now the recruiter is the picker. Well, we go there, your recruiter pushes their cart, they get all the way down this 1 million square foot warehouse, they find this incredibly hard to find object, and they go to put it in the shelf, and it doesn't want to go. It says, nope, no thanks, I'm good, I'm happy here. But the entire time they're traveling to that site, the entire time they're trying to get it in the cart, all the other things on the shelf are like randomly trying to jump in. These are the applicants and the referrals. They're like, I know you want a teddy bear. I know you want that teddy bear on the fifth aisle in aisle 45B on shelf 3. But I'm a action figure from 1980 that I'm awesome, and I think they'll love me if they could just get to meet me. You can imagine that's the life of a recruiter. We spend all of our time. We're trying to find the teddy bear, but honestly, there's action figures that didn't get ordered, or boxes of Kleenex or whatever it is. And all these different skill sets and things want to be in the cart as well, and we have to filter them out. And it gets worse. I continue in the article. I say, look, if we get the teddy bear into the cart, we've got that person, we've got the types of people we want. The picker brings the cart to the packers. The teddy bear gets out of the cart and says, you know what? I just realized where this box is going to go. I don't want to go there. They decide they're going to go back to their shelf. They change their mind, and that's this imaginative process. Or they read the label where they're going to be shipped to, and they say, I don't want to go there, but I heard that customer over there is really awesome. I'm going to go have a conversation with them. It's maddening. And all I could say, at the end of this is that I was so glad that most of the things in a fulfillment center are inanimate objects that don't argue and push back. So I can only imagine the pickers doing it. And it gave me a whole new appreciation for recruiters and what we put up with, and what the challenges we face in influencing everyone in the process. We are influencing the candidates. We are influencing the hiring managers. We are influencing ourselves. We are constantly in this multifaceted influencing mechanism. When you think about all that, that's that whole idea. This is why I always think so long and hard about when people talk about recruitment metrics and how they measure things. They say things like, well, if we can just focus on time to hire, or we can just focus on this measure or that measure, that's where they're missing the entire nuance of this problem. You got, say, for example, leaders who believe that their product brand is so attractive and their new startup idea is so incredibly engaging that everybody must just want to be part of it. Everyone must just want to be, joining in. And what they miss is that there's an engagement process that they have to do. They have to be involved in that process to effectively sell and influence the choices that they make. You have to convince that teddy bear to get into the cart, especially when that teddy bear has choices on the shelf. It isn't just the picker alone saying, get in the cart. And once you start thinking about that whole process, you see where the supply chain comes in. You can see building inventory and sourcing. You can see how this idea about quality of hire and the assessment process is so incredibly important as a mechanism. And when it's poorly defined, that's when things go off the rails. I get pushback a lot from people who say things like, "Well, you're so focused on process. We just move this forward?" And I always have to remind them that, we may have to go a little bit slower at first to go faster in the end, or we have to be consistent. That's where equity and diversity and inclusion start coming in. If we start treating different products differently and different people differently, we can miss opportunities to be inclusive. We can miss opportunities to make better hires. And you think about that teddy bear idea for a second. Imagine if I tell a picker, I need you to go find 2 teddy bears. The first one is in aisle 4, the second one's in aisle 5. Picker goes down, spends a great deal of time talking with the teddy bear. Remember, these are all live creatures now. These things come into life. Influencing teddy bear 4 to join the cart because that's the first one they arrived at, and they want to make sure they get a quick win. They don't want to leave empty-handed. So they do that. They really spend their time. But now they're pressed for time. Now they're under pressure. They've got to get candidates delivered. So they zip over to aisle 5 to find the second teddy bear. Teddy bear 5, they don't have the energy or the time to influence this teddy bear anymore. They're like, look, the clock is ticking. I need to get back with both these candidates. Take it or leave it. Maybe they have a great conversation. They drive this person forward, influence them, put them in the cart. They return. They've got 2 teddy bears, one that they vetted fully, one that they spent a great deal of time influencing and assessing. And the second one that they just spent time influencing. They just put them in the cart. They really made it happen, give them the opportunity. Don't worry, things will work out. And that was all because of a time pressure situation. So they've treated these 2 items that are essentially the same from opportunities very differently. And now they're in a position where they're advocating for these 2 items, these 2 people with the same level, but they haven't put the same quality in. They're potentially missing an incredible amount of opportunities, both in what they didn't learn or don't understand about the second one, but also on what they think they know about the first. They may have overlooked things to influence and get that person in. It works both ways, and that's a supply chain challenge as well. Consistency and really that level of fairness is what allows us to be more inclusive, what allows us to be really create opportunities and not let bias creep in to do that, really and involve that. So you can really see the connections. If you start thinking and understanding supply chain thinking, you can really change and influence not only how effective you are as a recruiter, but if you're any stakeholder in the process, interviewer, hiring manager, corporate controller who's working on finance, compensation, benefits, you can really be involved in change for the better of the recruiting process.
You mentioned, so we're talking about the process. We're talking about looking at inefficiencies in the supply chain, in the entire process of what you're doing. In this particular case, in talent acquisition. And there has massively been an evolution in looking at efficiencies, in any process, but bringing in digital transformation, digital technologies. And there's been a boom in the talent acquisition marketplace, like billions of dollars put into all these companies in acquisitions, in venture capital, in companies starting up left and right. So it is very much a hot market, the hiring market in general. And, if you look at what you mentioned, like, somebody looking specifically and focusing only on the quality of the hire versus like the entire process. Quality of hire is obviously going to be very important, but it's about looking at your entire process and seeing where those bottlenecks are, what's taking time, and how can we bring in tools to make those processes most efficient. So in that, when you're asking those questions, like how can we be more efficient? How can we do this better? Versus, okay, this is the way it's always been. This is just how we're doing things. And it's those who are pushing the needle to improve the process who tend to come up on top. So somebody who has the experience of going through those type of process transformations is massively valuable for a company. So I wanted to ask what type of questions, and I don't know if you want to specifically say if this was at Amazon. I'm kind of like looking at case studies here. Like what processes have you said, okay, let's make a difference here. This is what we improved. This is how we did it. Maybe these are the steps we've taken. I don't know if you want to give some examples.
Sure, no, I'm happy to. I think there's two big examples that I can think of in terms of the supply chain thinking and the questions that we were asking. The first one was, when I joined Amazon in 2012, they had an ongoing, really strong commitment to recruitment of military talent. There was a leadership in place in the ops field that saw the advantages for diversity, inclusion, as well as for just capabilities and knowledge. There was a rich talent pool in what are called junior military officers. These are lieutenants and captains that are in the services that were transitioning to civilian work. They're leaving the services finally after all the great work they'd done in the service, moving out. And so they started aggressively recruiting. They had strong relationships, and they were hiring these JMOs to come in to Amazon to work in the operations world. They were just uniquely fit in terms of their ostensible skills. But when I joined, the program was well regarded, but also recognized as having some pretty significant issues. The biggest issue was around the hires were not being retained. They were coming in, doing good work, but leaving very quickly. Maybe in 1 or 2 years, they were not excelling and promoting and moving forward. They weren't reaching that desired outcome. So I dove into it, and the first question I wanted to understand was what was being referred to as a program, military recruiting. I said, let's understand how we're attracting, how are we attracting, engaging the talent, and then ultimately, what are we doing with them? And what became evident very, very quickly was that there was not a program. A program is, by definition, it's a set of instructions. That's what it is. If you think about computer coding instructions, if you think about a playbill, or if you go to a play, they give you a program. Yeah. It describes what's happening. It has a beginning and an end. The program the effort that they had for hiring military talent had no end. It was an intake process, and it was an enthusiasm process, but there was nothing about onboarding. There was nothing about effective assessment. There was nothing about growth and retention. They hadn't taken the time to understand the potential needs and challenges for these talented people coming in. An obvious one, for example, is these individuals had worked in the military, and most of them, that was their entire professional work up to that point. Many, gone to university or gone to an academy, gone into the service, worked for several years, and had exited. They had never worked with a civilian workforce. And I remember I had a person tell me, he said, well, in the military, it's great because, people are collegial and collaborative. And I said, yeah, but they can't quit. And he's like, sure they can. I go, no, if a captain tells a private to do something, the private's going to do it. And everything's color coded. You see people come in, they wear the same uniform, but you can tell by the stripes and the stars who's who in the organization. It doesn't require a lot of intuitive. It's one of the foundational ideas is that you're following orders, you're being guided, you're being directed, and that's necessary. But if you get to a civilian workforce, you can give orders and people will do it, but eventually you're going to lose engagement. You're going to have people that are leaving because they don't feel like they're being heard, or they're not getting a chance to contribute, or they don't want to be told what to do every time. All these different ideas, these concepts are there. It's not perfect. It isn't 100%, but these were the challenges that were being faced. Leadership styles were not being developed, coached. A lot of these folks were not being, I think, effectively prepared to lead people that weren't in the enlisted ranks and in this military corps. And once we got that mindset understood that's the nature of the problem, we were able to work with these individuals, give them training, coaching, and better onboarding so that they were more successful. So the questions I was asking in this are, what are we doing with these people on day 2? One of the big ideas in Amazon is around this idea that every day is day 1. There's a quote from Jeff Bezos about, on the internet, every day is day 1. It's always new, it's growth. And that's really a powerful idea. And my question is, so what about day 2?
I love it here. Woo!
Yeah. And it's like, so you've got all this enthusiasm, but then you're not giving them an understanding of what it is they need. And you can take the term military or veteran or military spouse, and you can scratch that out and replace almost any inclusive idea in there. And it's the same question. When you take someone from a different culture or a different work style or a different industry, what do they need to be given the best opportunities to succeed? And are you ready to handle that level? There's a different example. I won't use the company names, but Amazon used to recruit very actively from two very different supply chain delivery companies. One has a multicolored service, and one has sort of a monochromatic brownish service. And you can recognize both those delivery companies all the time. One of them, their leaders were very effective in their culture. They found that when they came in, they knew the supply chain, they knew logistics, they knew the speed and the ability to get things done efficiently, and they were very successful. The other group also understood the same things about logistics, supply chain, and speed, but that culture was much more structured. They had a set process that was well-defined, and you followed it or else. It was, it was in the binder, and you took the steps, and if you had a question, you found that question in the binder, you flipped to that page, and that's how you did it. Their culture was much more predefined and really about following the prescription. Those leaders didn't do as well. And what they recognized over time was that while both are great organizations operating at scale, one focused on the ability to solve problems in a more dynamic way. And that was more effective and more welcoming and more enabling in the Amazon culture than the other's method of doing it. Same thing. The idea is, what are you doing to coach? Now that we understood that, now we can actually talk about onboarding individuals to say, hey, you did what you were doing at the first organization, and now you're here with us. This is what's going to make you successful. Keep doing it. Then the other group, you did what you were doing at the organization. You were very successful at it. Here's what you need to change or be ready to rethink to be successful here. And we saw some great output there. So here I am in recruiting and talent acquisition, thinking about onboarding. I'm worried about the downstream process and how we're going to be successful, because that's how supply chains work. You can't separate them. What you decide early on impacts what happens downstream. And blockages downstream or challenges downstream can impact what happens upstream. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's worked with candidates as a recruiter who gets a call from that hiring manager that says, hey, I know we've got some great candidates and we interviewed them all last week, but we've got a quarterly review and we need to hold off on hiring. We've got to keep them all warm. Tell them all that we're Not going to make any decisions yet. That's the worst. It's so frustrating, and it can be great when you make those calls and people are great, but then 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks go by and they say, keep them warm. And then, a month goes and suddenly you had 6 candidates that were ready. A month goes by and you have 2 or 1 or none. And these leaders are like, hey, where are all the candidates? And I was like, well, we had them, we kept them warm, but eventually they burned on the stove and now they're gone. And, or other companies pick them up. So now you can start to see that relationship and you dive into these things. What are we doing? We're in the sourcing process. I just talked about this in a new article I just wrote about diversity, and it's around 5 whys. We say, we want to change the inclusive nature of the hiring. You have to start diving into where the sources are. In sourcing, you ask the people, why are we seeing these outcomes? Because we do this. Why are we doing that? Because of this. Why are we doing that? And you can use a 5 why mechanism or method to really dive into what's going on, and then start thinking more inclusively and think differently about what you're doing. So now we're talking about how we change the sourcing process. And it's really just around diving in and being, really asking those questions about what are you doing? How are we doing it? What's it getting us? So what can we change or do differently? So if I fast forward to Ancestry, a second example, take us out of Amazon. When I was at Ancestry, the goal was to build a university program. There wasn't a university hiring program when I joined. It was something they had not done in a formal, structured way. So they were concerned about their brand. How do they approach campus? How do they engage on campus when they're competing with, the FANG organizations and all these great organizations? How do they bring their brand into play? So we had to design that from the ground up. And what I did, I followed a similar thinking process. I said, I'm not worried about how we recruit. We'll get there in a minute. What I am worried about is, what are we going to do with these university hires once we get them? We bring them on, we fund, we do this. How are we going to onboard them? How are we going to integrate them? What are we going to do? And I remember one of the leaders, their reaction at first was, let's worry about that when they get here. And I said, that's like the absolute worst thinking. The metaphor I used for him was, I said, go buy a new car without having a place to park it. So you can go to the dealer, you can buy it, you can spend cash for it or get a loan. You're going to find the car you love. It's the right color. It's beautiful. It's everything. Then you're going to take it home and you got no garage, no parking space, no driveway. You're living in your car. That's your problem now. Or you're going to walk 6 miles to get it parked, whatever it's going to be. If you don't have a place to park a car, you got to solve that problem first before you go buy one. And he was like, okay, all right, you got me. So we put together this program, this effort, this roadmap for these new hires, these university hires, that we were going to, the opportunities that we needed, that we wanted, and that we would deliver. And that became the branding opportunity. That became the differentiator. We were able to go to campus with, not the biggest amount of resources. We're sitting at booths, we're in those relationships, in those events with much larger organizations, with much larger teams. But we had a program, we had an experience, we had a roadmap that we could tell people, this is what you'll do, this is what you'll experience, and if you're successful along the way, this is what the outcome will be. And with that, we were able to close a significant amount of people. I think the budget was for 30, and I think the budget was for 50, if I remember correctly, about 50 headcount. We wound up moving to 75 headcount because of the successes we were having and the needs for the development. And these are tech recruiting, product, marketing, or a very wide range. And we were able to fill it with an incredibly high volume of applicants, a lot of engagement, and a strong pipeline. But it was really about, because we had a very clear, honest landing page roadmap to be able to give these students and these university hires to say, this is what you're going to do and what you're going to get and what your experience is going to be if you're successful. One of the number one complaints I've seen from over the years from university hires is, especially in internship programs, is they're sold a bill of goods. They hear about a program, they join, they're excited, and then they don't get it. They say, I was hired to do this. I was told I'd work on that, and we didn't get it. So one of the areas that I told the team in Ancestry was important was, if we give them this opportunity, if we sell them on it, if we promote it, we need to deliver it. And yes, business priorities change, projects change, but we can be transparent about that. We don't have to tell them, you will work on this module for the user interface. We can say, you're going to work on the user interface, that's the plan, whatever that example is. And if that doesn't come to fruition, something changed, we have to be proactive and let them know as soon as possible about changes so that we can really begin to engage them on areas that matter and that are important. And that's, again, supply chain thinking. Think about it. Somebody's delivery truck comes into the warehouse and says, okay, I got 4,000 of these things on the truck. Where do you want them? If your warehouse foreperson is sitting there going, oh, gee, I don't know. I knew 4,000 were coming, but I don't know. Let me go figure it out. That truck driver is going to push everything off the back of the truck into the parking lot and leave. They got deliveries. They got a schedule to meet, and now you're going to be loading in stuff into your warehouse. But if that truck driver pulls in and says, hey, I got your 4,000 units, and they go, yep, take it to door 5. We'll load it. We'll offload the pallets there, and we're going to move them right off the truck into the back section straight away. Boom, done. Everybody's happy. The flow works, and things move forward. It's the same idea.
I was smiling earlier because as you were talking about, projects changing and things changing and setting this map of the first 30, 60, 90 days of what they're expected to do, which, by the way, I love seeing that in job descriptions, like that success map of what you're going to be doing. I really wish more, and I see an evolution of companies actually doing that, so you get an idea of what success looks like. But your last article before the supply chain one was about VUCA and the whole working and being in this volatile environment and being resilient. And so it's just you gotta, you're almost having these conversations of yes, things have changed drastically. And I know totally. in our last board meeting, we're like, if I hear the new normal one more time, my head's gonna explode. But then our entire conversation, we speak on our board meetings for an hour every month, our entire conversation was around things that have changed. So even if you don't want to hear the new normal or any of that sort of thing, most things have completely changed on how we're doing things. So I was just reminded of your previous article on dealing with change with people and addressing that.
It's funny because when I penned that article, it was much more about just sort of a catharsis, little therapies where the ideas, what are these ideas? And it's a speech that I've given a lot, or, in coaching that I've given people quite a bit. And to your point, it is around, look, things are volatile, things are going to change. And I think if you can embrace that things are fluid, you're much better equipped than if you just want things to stay a certain way. I always feel bad for people that tell me that they say, I don't adapt to change well. I think, well, then, okay, you're on the wrong planet because everything's changing, everything moves, and maybe it's incremental, maybe it's slow, and it feels like things are staying the same, but they really don't. Everything is in motion in some way. Maybe it's not going in the motion or the direction we want it to go, but things are changing all the time. So, it's definitely there. And that's when I think about some of these trends going forward in recruiting, these technology trends that are happening about, in the analytics space and the work. And Kevin Wheeler just put out an article about some of this idea about AI in the space. And I was reading that actually this morning, I saw it. And it was just this idea, I think he brings up these, provocative ideas about AI is going to replace something. Robots will replace certain functions. And whether you realize it or not, AI is already doing these things. And I think it's when you think about these ideas about, say, programmatic advertising, it used to be we create a job posting, to your point, put it out, and you hope for good results, where you could influence it by posting it in certain places, get more inclusion and broadcasting. But some of these artificially intelligent tools that now exist help us develop and do the scanning and the web crawling and all this research for us, so that we create these advertisements. They actually go to places where people who are engaged or likely to be engaged, and these algorithms get better and better and better. And that's moving into another idea that it's really moving away from so-called advertising into this marketing idea. If your company mission resonates with a particular population, you can connect with that population through the social media, through those marketing ideas. And those are powerful tools. The question is, how do we know that they're working for us? If we started on a year ago and we just put a job description out and we get applicants and we get people that we select, that we turn into candidates, that we make offers to, that's great. But if we start using these tools, how are we measuring impact? Is it because we got more people? Is it because we had a smaller amount of people, but they were all more likely to be hired? Are we getting better inclusion? Are we reaching new audiences? Or is our algorithm just refining and reinforcing our own bias that we may have not even realized we put in? So, measuring that. And another one, a technology trend that I struggle with, and I say struggle with because they're popular, they're getting increasing in use, but these are these chatbots, these ideas around, the interface and, hi, and they always give it some name that's sort of whatever, thematic, and it interacts with you on a basis where it's asking you questions or helping you get started. And I think those are emerging more and more. And the push is into having them do basic assessments. It's an interactive process. And you could think about that. A low-hanging fruit was when people are getting those basic qualifying questions. Are you at or above the legal age to work? Do you have, representation? Are you authorized to work? Or visa questions. Instead of just having the person click radio buttons, now you've got this human appearing chatbot asking these questions or saying things like, gee, we're based in beautiful downtown Boston, Massachusetts, and that's where our office is. Are you a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan? And anyone who's really brilliant would pick Red Sox. But anyway, that's another conversation. So you start to see these tools that are, the AI is beginning to really drive that process and make that happen. Even in some of the more mundane tasks for experienced recruiters, everybody knows that if you've got a good ATS with a good applicant database, that you should mine it. There are people that were in there from before or who've expressed interest or that you've uploaded that maybe didn't get that job, but they might be better for this job. Or they maybe, they applied earlier, it wasn't a fit. And how do you bring them back? Or who are the people that expressed interest in mining that? There's better and better AI tools that are mining that to say, you could imagine, especially when you get a large applicant database, operating at scale with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of profiles. You can start to see these AI tools saying, hey, look, you got this job you just created, and this is an applicant pool that is already in-house for you. You don't need to revisit the basic questions. And you can bring them on board. You should reach out to them. They expressed interest. They weren't a fit for that specific role or weren't selected, but here they are. That's amazing that, if resources like that can really drive the process, because then it takes us into that recruiters empowered to do deeper, better things.
To get away from the manual, please. I am leaning hard into tech and AI. I know this is people are like, oh, it's going to take away jobs, but anything that is going to make my job more efficient, bring it on. Let's get things done. I don't want to sit and check buttons and input data. I think in the recruitment process, when you are tasked with having to do all these manual data entry and, in the applicant tracking system so they can track your data, that process alone, if you check a box incorrectly or forget to check a box and you're charged with doing that along with your whole process of everything else, then data gets skewed. If you can offload that into a technology like a chatbot, I'm all for that. I don't know. Was that your feeling too? Were you?
I struggle with it for two. It's to your point. It's great. Yeah, I'll put it this way: a chatbot interacting with someone is going to be helpful to operate at scale, and it's also consistent. Chatbots, if they're built well, if the AI tools are well, they're going to be. You design them to deliver the outcomes, and if they're going to be fair. They're going to use language that's clearly understood. But the risk is that they're only as good as the builders. So if there's a language that the team uses that's biased, if they talk about imagine a chatbot that when you click, you're clicking on it. Say you and I are both clicking on it, and we're having a simultaneous conversation, which is something chatbots can do, which humans really can't. Is you and I could be talking, and imagine if the chatbot says to us both, we click on, oh, we're interested. Hey, bro, and it's I think that's probably going to bother you. Or
They do that. I've interacted with a chat bot before, and it was like a very like surface customer service situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, it responded like, wow, that's really awesome, I dig that, or something like that. And I was like, oh, she's cheeky.
Yeah. And it's like, so but does that appeal, to, essentially they've taken this really great AI tool and they've imposed the limits on it that the developer brought to the table. They said, hey, look, here's something super brilliant, but, call everybody dude. That's the latest. You're like, great. I don't want to be called dude. I don't want, I'm just not into that. So, and inclusion, that's why inclusion is hard. And that's why when people interact with each other, when hopefully we're better at it, over time, we can intuit things and we can understand, oh, look, this is a person, this is how they want to be addressed, and things like that. It's anyone if you go to the counter and you remember the good old days when, you go to order a drink at the bar and there's that glamour period when you don't get carded because there's not a chance you're underage,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like, and then, eventually you miss that.
Nowadays, if I get carded, I'm like, thank you.
Exactly. I was at dinner the other night and the waiter carded us all, and I was just like, sweet, my new favorite.
Yeah,
but,
you're like, oh, I don't know.
But
this
imagine,
might be my Mexico ID.
yeah, it's like, sorry, the ink isn't dry. But it's this idea about, that's where it's complex, and I've seen issues with AI tools, chatbots, but maybe not even just chatbots, but this is I think an ongoing beef that people have. You go to a website, you see a posting, it's really interesting, or you're directed there by a recruiter, and it says upload your resume. So you do that, or put your LinkedIn profile in, or whatever it is, and you're great. And then it doesn't auto-populate or do anything. And then it says, okay, now please complete the application process. And maybe there's compliance regulations for that. Maybe you need to have, the person has to assert and self-identify and fill it in. But honestly, don't ask me for my resume if you're just going to have me fill out the stuff. Or worse yet, and I've seen sites do this, they say that upload your profile or your resume to fill out the application. Like, we'll use that. And then it's horrible. It's, you put it in and it says, like, it's got words from the bottom of your resume stuck in the job title of your current job, or all these different things, and you wind up having to fix it. And I've seen the difference when I've seen other sites where you upload a profile and it is word for word exactly what does it. The population is amazing. It really auto-fills correctly, takes the information, and it just makes the entire process much, much better. And it isn't just about speed. It's about, wow, a company that took the time to invest in or buy or develop a tool like that, they're producing a better product. It's much, much better. I mean, that's the kinds of things where, and that's when it comes in again, get back to these other tools, these other trends about onboarding and the recruiting process. That's where AI comes in. The superpower, though, of AI, it has two superpowers. One is scale. Whatever it is you can do, it can do it fast. The second thing is, whatever it's going to do while it's doing it quickly, it does it consistently.
Yeah.
It's the idea is that you don't have to question, gee, did 3 recruiters approach the candidates so differently that one is better? And they maybe have different work styles, and I don't want to stifle their work style, but I want them to be more like recruiter B who's getting the best ROI. Those sorts of questions. With the AI tools, you say, look, the AI is the AI, and this is the result that it gets. Maybe that's good, maybe that's not, but at the end of the day, it's what's driving the process forward, and it gives a level of consistency. It's much more difficult for someone to say they were treated unfairly or even poorly by an AI tool versus other candidates. But again, the risk is your AI bot, if it's poorly designed, is treating everyone poorly. So I guess that's another form of fairness.
There's certainly been some stuff in the news. I think Amazon a couple of years ago. I want to take a poll. We have some people in the chat. If you have automated processes in your current role, I'd be very curious maybe what tools maybe you've used, and if they've been AI enabled, or if you've used chatbots, any experience you have, put it in the chat, and make sure you put there, it says it defaults to all panelists. Make sure it's all panelists and attendees so everybody can see, and I'll read them, because I would love to know, like, are you for chatbots? Do you think it helps the process? at the upcoming Talent Congress conference, which is October 20th through the 22nd. Todd, you're going to be speaking there, and it's 3 days. The first day is leadership and strategy, which is the day you'll be speaking, and you'll be talking about some amazing tools and some advice on conversations in the boardroom. And we also have some amazing speakers. I spoke with Meredith. I think it's Hedstrom. No, I think I'm thinking about my friend. But she was at Eventbrite for several years, and now she's at this company called Social Survey, and she's just implemented all these automated processes because they have to be very lean and scrappy. And one of them was in reference checks. She's like, one of the things that takes our recruitment or our HR team so long as these reference checks. And she's like, I implemented this automated technology that not only like does the reference checks in a very like speedy way, but on the back end then asks the person or the person doing the reference check if they're interested in hearing more about the company. So it's not only like a great way to do a reference check, it also brings them potential new clients. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I'd be curious like what, how the person filling out the forms or what have you doing the reference check felt about that, you know, being sold on the back end. But just ideas like that on how you can implement processes so you can like have your teams focus on better things. And I had this other conversation the other day from somebody else who's on our board. And the idea was if I could get rid of, she felt the Boolean, writing Boolean strings and all that was going to go away. There's tools that do that for you. Yes, it's amazing to know how to write a string and have the operators, and you know, in case technology goes down. But if you can be super efficient in your process and you can bring in these technologies to enable it, like seek out, you know, that can do that. I mean, like written by a bunch of guys from Microsoft. I mean, it's an amazing tool. And, you know, so you can have your sourcers focus more on the engagement. They're actually like training sourcers on understanding technology so they can have conversations when somebody goes into an interview instead of them, you know, like, so they understand the code injection, they understand R, they understand Python. So when a hiring manager or a team says we didn't like them for this reason, and the sourcer, instead of saying, okay, I'll go find some more, can push back and have more of a technical conversation. So teaching them that instead while enabling them with tools, that's powerful. So these are some of the conversations we're going to be talking about at Talent Congress. You guys can find out more at talentcongress.com. But you're going to be speaking. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about, Todd?
Sure. I mean, I think in a nutshell, that what you just talked about is really the subject matter. There are tools and training and resources that can make us better technical recruiters and better recruiters in general on the technical aspect. But the challenge is when we take the talent function into the boardroom, you know, what's happening, what's that conversation about? And to the world you just emphasized with, we have better tools and better resources that can make us better technical screeners, or even take technical screening off of the table for us to automate it, standardize it, make it fair, fast, efficient. What does that leave us with? The personality assessment, the storytelling, you know, the relationships about, you know, now we have 20 candidates that are all technically qualified. We know they can write in code, and we see they know the technology. They can write in the JavaScript or the R, the Python, whatever that is, and they can do it. But how do they think? How do they operate? How do they handle stress? How do they handle all these different tools? And I keep seeing more and more of these conversations. And then what happens is we go into the boardroom and we're having these big, high-end conversations about the trends and the issues. You know, I've seen conversations where recruiters, talent acquisition leaders come in. They're brought in by the HR leadership usually for 15 minutes of the window. They get one quarter of the slide on the HR update for the monthly, you know, MBR, and they're saying, "Oh, we hired 182 people and we did it 17% faster than last quarter, and it's awesome." And then they say, "Okay, thanks, get out." The question is, what happens when after that person leaves the room? What really goes on? What's that conversation about? What was the conversation before? You know, what do C-suite leaders think about? What do they talk about? What issues are they facing? And how do they react to, you know, some of the ways that we're typically recruiting leaders and TA leaders are typically coached to bring in. And I'll be talking a bit more about that from sort of firsthand experience, being in that room as a C-suite participant or coming into finance and boards and hearing not so much how they really talk to each other, but more about what the real conversations are about and how we can do better as recruiting to speak to those points and continue to be part of the conversation.
It's going to be such a great presentation. You and I spoke several times, and we actually, on our board of advisor meeting, we created this program. It's for talent acquisition by talent acquisition. These are all our stories, and I posed the question, as talent acquisition leaders, what do you want to see at a conference? What's important to you? And so we created this program over the 3 days in October, specifically around that. And so it's going to be such a great, you mentioned Kevin Wheeler earlier. He's actually keynoting day one. And so we're gonna have our luminaries panel. So it'll be Jerry Crispin and Kevin Wheeler and Lou Adler on a panel, and just talking about, these are people who've been in the industry for so long, and they've had so many conversations, and also people who are in the trenches like you, you're in the boardroom and you're having these conversations, and it's just going to be at every level. So I'm so looking forward to that. I wanted to make sure that everybody knew these articles that you've written. While we put them in our newsletter that you can sign up for at techrecruit.io, but you can also find them on your LinkedIn profile, right? Like if you go to Todd Davis, make sure there's tons of Todd Davises, but the one that works at IBM, if you scroll down, you look at your activity or your articles, you can see the ones that you've posted, and you can read about the VUCA article that you wrote, and the D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and then also your supply chain article that you wrote. And I think a lot of those got really, really interesting reviews and engagement. And so I think that those sort of things are just so helpful. And thank you for actually contributing to the industry and helping people learn. I think that's massive.
It's my pleasure. It's something I love the topic. I like to contribute, and the thing that I look for, really, honestly, I get energy from the dialogue. And just people like them and they see them, and I love that. But at the same time, I also think about I get great questions, comments. It was funny because one person, when I wrote the VUCA article, the comment was a gentleman that I work with actually at Ancestry, and he said, I like the optimistic approach. And I remember my first reaction was, I didn't think the article was that optimistic, but okay, great. If it feels that way to you, then that's a desired outcome.
Yeah, but that's great though. To have an optimistic point of view for something that's very, volatile. And what is the acronym for VUCA again? It's volatile.
It's volatile, uncertain.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I don't know if you're asking for mine or for
yours. You're like, let me look it up.
Well, I just want to make sure. I'll give you both. Let me see here. So, because what I did was in the article, I put together this idea. There's VUCA that we know, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and that's what's going on. That's the pandemic in a nutshell. With really, things are changing rapidly. They're volatile. We don't know what's happening. We see some of the trends that are emerging, but we don't know the complexity. What are those changes and this rapid movement do? It's making it harder for us to do these things. And then the ambiguity, it means certain different things to different people. And that's just a very, very common situation that many people have used as a framework to analyze different challenges and problems. And what I thought about in looking at this, reading all these things and seeing all this, was in that VUCA model for recruiting. It's not just a challenge. It's not adverse. There is an opportunity. Maybe that's where the optimism comes in. But it's really about taking that, this new VUCA, instead of volatile, it's virtual. We're doing connections like this, having these interfaces that, frankly, recruiters have been having for years. We've been leading in terms of digital interactive technology, just in doing our work. And then maybe this is probably the breakaway idea. It's unlimited. There's no limits anymore. Before it was, we have to call people during, in the mornings or in the evenings to get hold of them. That's when they're available, they're working otherwise. Now it's like, look, people are working from home. There's no limits. We just have this idea. And then the collaboration. It's getting much more important to collaborate together, to work in a collaborative way, because we can't sit in the conference room physically together and share notes. We have to use some of these, great online collaboration tools, or we have to give instruction. A leader say, you have to say, team, this is the goal on that Zoom chat or that video panel. I need you to come together and do this. We've all got agreement. Now go do it. And then basically everyone's off working on their own for a while. And you've got to be able to try. You can't look over their shoulder. You can't look across the space in the office and see all the cubicles that have no one in them, or everyone's filled, or you don't get that vibe from the office anymore of what's going on. There's no problem, or is there a birthday cake in the conference room nobody told me about? All those things. And and then you start to see the accelerating. Because people are working virtually, people are working in this way, things are moving faster and faster and faster and faster. There's just no barriers anymore. You think about the evolution of work. It went from most of us don't remember the time before email, when everything was a phone call or just paper mail. So it was hours and days. You would call people and you would do this crazy thing. You would leave a message and then maybe they would call you back and do that. Now it's I see people that send text messages to ask if I saw the email that they just sent me, and then they say they can FaceTime. It's just all this constant movement, and that's where the VUCAs come in. Moving from a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous to a virtual, unlimited, collaborative, and accelerating mindset. And I think once we do that, we start to see this is how we can really not only survive, but thrive in how we do things and move forward. And I think one of the things that I mentioned in the article was about, this guy's a personal hero of mine. I think it's hilarious. He, years ago, Robert Kelly was this academic, knows all about Korean Peninsula relations, and he was being interviewed on the BBC. And he included, I included that in the article, the link to the video. It was, many of you may remember it. He's doing this really important interview. They're talking about nuclear disaster on the Korean Peninsula, being interviewed on the BBC. And as he's talking in his home office, his toddler daughter just comes in.
Yeah.
It's a great parade moment. And then his other child comes in, who's I think an infant in one of these strollers. And it's one of the greatest moments, one of the greatest work from home video moments in ever. And I think it set the tone for, at that time, it was just a few years ago, that was hilarious. And, it was like, oh, that's awesome. That's never going to happen to me. It's happening to everybody. Yeah. And, here we are today, this uncertain world. And now we've got, I've been on more video calls with people that are, their cat runs across the keyboard. Their kids want to be part of the conversation. And I kind of love that. I think it's great. I'm looking over your shoulder there, Stacey, and see, all the snowboarding and all these different things. And it's like, if you and I worked in an office in the old school where we may know each other, we may talk, but I may not know you were in a snowboard.
Yeah.
Unless you bring it up, unless you tell me about it, or you get to a space. But now I can see that and I can learn about it. We can we're bringing our whole selves to work, whether we want to or not.
Yeah. It's going to be, as we're talking about the supply chain, it'll be interesting to see the transformations within there. This has been a really great talk. Todd, thank you so much. If anybody wants to get hold of you, how can they do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn. It's the best way to go. I do my best to be responsive, and I try to answer all the queries that I get. Can't make any promises. Some of them I don't answer, but it's the best way to get hold of me.
Hey, Todd, do you need a new sales rep? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, do you need a new technology? Yeah, I know. There's been a few of those. But anyway, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you at Talent Congress. And if anybody wants more information on that or to see the agenda, it's at talentcongress.com. And we'll be back here next week, same time, same channel, 10 a.m. on the Talent Analytics Show. And of course, Dueling Sorcerers is Tuesdays at 10 a.m. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you next time. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.